It is dynasty draft season. It is NFL fantasy football draft season. Things are heating up. So I've got 3 players that are on my do not draft list. The first guy on my list is Deebo Samuel. Now, he's on my do not draft list in redraft and in dynasty leagues, but for dynasty purposes, let's look at where he's going. In startups, he's going around pick 35. Now, that's not maybe a crazy number. I think he's going as like wide receiver 17. To me, when I look at what Deebo Samuel is likely to give you, wide receiver 17 might be more like his ceiling, and like a ceiling of if he's healthy, rather than a guy who you're going to ever get increased value on. And so for a player like that, when I'm looking in my dynasty draft specifically, I'm not looking to draft players at their likely ceilings. There is just not a ton to like about his current value. If he were to drop below Drake London, below Brandon Ayuk, drop, maybe 2 rounds in ADP, sure, I would understand being interested in drafting Deebo Samuel, because for 2023, he's a nice player. He's a good route runner. He's used a lot on the offense. But what we've seen over the last year and a half is that his breakout season was the outlier. He's going into his 5th season in the NFL, and he has the one wide receiver 3 outlier season. Outside of that, his yards per target is about half of that breakout season. His touchdowns per touch is about a third of what his breakout season was. And overall, you're looking at a guy who's been losing volume in the passing game, and he's been losing volume in the rushing game. There's tons of things around Deebo Samuel that are making him a do not draft outside of the player alone. And then when you silo it in and just look at the player, there's enough question marks where Deebo Samuel is an enormous do not draft, an enormous fade. If he were to fall a round or 2 later, then he becomes interesting. But until he does that, I am very much against drafting Deebo Samuel at his current ADP. All right, we're going to keep it 49er specific with this next guy, and it's a guy I just mentioned a little bit ago, George Kittle. Now, he's going at pick 61. He's going at tight end 4. That's not horrible, but the reality is he only averaged 51 yards a game last year. I wouldn't be surprised if that at best stayed the same, but it's likely to fall in 2023. George Kittle is competing with Brandon Ayuk. He's competing with Deebo Samuel. He's competing with Christian McCaffrey. He is competing with the fact that this team as a whole doesn't really, outside of Christian McCaffrey, have one person filling a role. I think George Kittle, even though he is efficient, his days of being an elite tight end are probably over. He was a fine tight end at the end of the season last year. Like, his overall production landed him as like tight end 4 or something, but you weren't really happy with that. He was like, okay, great, I didn't lose tight end this week. I think Pitts, Goddard, Waller, Ingram are all guys I would take over George Kittle at their current ADP, especially in dynasty startup ADP. They're going like 1 to 3 rounds later, and I am definitely in on all 4 of those guys over George Kittle. There's not as many questions at the quarterback position for any of them. There's not as many questions of the overall volume they're likely to see. I think Pitts is really the only one who's like got this wide range, but I'll take the top of Pitts range, the chance at the top of Pitts range versus, what we're likely to see with Kittle, which is maybe the middle range. I don't think we can see the ceiling of Kittle anymore at this point in his career. My last do not draft player, and I know I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate about this one, but it's a running back, and it's Kenneth Walker. Right now in dynasty startups, he's going ADP 55. He's going RB 17. Similar to Deebo Samuel, man, that RB 17 spot is probably like the highest I would want. I expect him to finish. The addition of Zach Charbonnet in the 2nd round of this year's NFL draft is not something to ignore. You cannot ignore it. What Zach Charbonnet does well complements what Kenneth Walker does not do well. And I think that's really, really important. I think they're both going to be good players in the NFL. I think they're both going to be good players for fantasy, but they're not going to have any sort of ceiling with regularity that you can really rely on. I think Charbonnet has a fair chance to take the high leverage touches by midseason, and high leverage I'm meaning the passing down work, I'm meaning the goal line work. He is the bigger body back. He's a good pass catcher out of the backfield. He's a smart player. He did it in college at 2 different programs. Ultimately, when you look at Zach Charbonnet, I think that there's a chance, I'm not saying that this is going to happen for 2023, but there's a chance that he actually outscores Walker. And even if he doesn't, I think it's going to be close enough, and the fact that you can even have the argument means that Kenneth Walker at RB 17 might be his ceiling. Like maybe he gets to RB 15. But when you look at really the ADP and like the landscape of the running back position, Kenneth Walker is much more like J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Miles Sanders of the world than he is the guys who are automatically in that dynasty top 12. And I'm high on DeAndre Swift. I'm high on J.K. Dobbins. And at ADP, I'd probably prefer them to Kenneth Walker. So it's one of those things where Walker at running back 17 is okay. You're probably not going to get much better than that, and you might get a lot worse than that. So he is a guy I am just not drafting this year. I'm going to let this situation shake out. Drop any questions about these guys below. Drop any other players that you're interested in hearing about, and I'll leave you my thoughts. Don't forget to check out the rest of this 4for4 channel. Subscribe. Give me a follow on Twitter at Marco_NFL. And don't forget to be kind, do good, and I'll see you next time. Peace.